That, let's get to our conversation of the day, where we are speaking about food and value chains, boosting food security. We'll be looking at this with Shalom Diku, who is a sustainability and policy lead at Food for Education. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon.
Thank you so much for having me, Kelvin. It's a pleasure to be here.
All right, so food security, of course, every year, every season, we're speaking about how to make sure that our foods are secure. And as we look at how farmers usually handle food after harvest, what goes into the nitty-gritties in terms of how they need to handle that? And from where you sit, what do you think should be done? Because this is something that has been going on for a very long time.
True. Thank you so much for that. And again, thank you so much for having me, Kelvin. I think for us at Food for Education, we have narrowed down the question of food security to a key stakeholder, the child, right? And the child in the education context, because we understand that for this child to be a productive member of society in future, they need to eat. You and I remember when we were children, we didn't care what it was. If we were hungry, we needed to eat. Currently, what Food for Education has been doing over the last 12 years is feeding children. To date, every school day, we feed 450,000 children and contribute to a value chain in which farmers across this country can actually have a ready market to feed those children in the 10 counties we operate in. And we do that through large kitchens. One of them just down the road here cooks 60,000 meals a day, right? So these farmers have that access to this market to feed them, to ensure these children do not go hungry. And that's how we are contributing to ensuring food security for that vulnerable population.
Okay, all right, so let us look at, in terms of now the farmer,
yes,
and how they can contribute into this, because many of the farmers who operate or are included in this, they come from areas, the rural areas.
True.
They have, that is how they've been operating. Some of them might not have the knowledge of how they need to handle post-harvest produce. So therefore, when it comes to awareness in terms of how farmers can be just made aware of this, what can be done?
Great, that's a good question. So if we look at our value chain and see where the farmer can actually fit in, the food that we make for these children cuts across a number of legumes. We do beans, 3 varieties of beans. We do green grams, or ndengu, as we call them here. We do Western ndengu, a version of ndengu that is from the west of the country. But we also do more perishable goods. We do carrots, because of nutrition. These children must eat healthily. We do tomatoes, onions, cabbages. And we even periodically, once a week, do a fruit, bananas. So if you look at that entire value chain, Kelvin, when we source all of these, we source them from farmers in 13 counties across this country. For example, the previous news story spoke about farmers in Machakos and Makueni.
Yes.
Our green grams come from farmers in Makueni. And these farmers are diverse. The way in which we source these green grams is where our partners identify these farmers. Some are small-scale farmers. Some might just have 1 guinea to contribute. Some might have tens, right? We don't discriminate, and we work with partners to identify small-scale farmers or smallholder farmers to be able to contribute. One big thing is that in 2027, we want to feed 1 million children. We believe that will over double what we're feeding now. More farmers will need to provide to this value chain to be able to contribute to more children feeding, learning, performing, and actually doing better in life, we hope, because of that meal.
All right, thank you so much for just giving us that elaborate answer. And now let's move on and look at another different thing.
Sure.
When it comes to sustainability of this particular initiative, and how different people can also, because someone might sit down and say, okay, a couple of kids are really suffering from malnutrition. They don't get food, and as we look across Africa, we have like almost 400 million who are not getting the nutrients that they need. So in terms of making sure that at least children from these different and diverse communities also get this help, what goes into that? And for someone who wants to start such an initiative, what do they need to do?
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you for that question. And I think sustainability is quite key, because for anything to have that desired impact, it must be sustainable, even for it to scale.
Yes.
The way in which our program is framed is that we have a trifecta of stakeholders involved. The first is the parent, because next to the child is that parent, right? That parent is a key stakeholder because they contribute a small amount of money to that meal that that child will pay, right? But the parent is not alone. We also bring in donors and well-wishers, right, from across the country. Be they be a donor in Europe, be they be a company here in Kenya that want to give back and care about food. They are key stakeholders. That's the second. But then third, because we know that under Article 43 and 53 of the Constitution, the right to education and the right to certain basic rights, including not to be hungry, to be free from hunger, is key for children. The government has that duty. So the government is the third. We partner with county governments in Murang'a, in Mombasa, and here in Nairobi, right? The Dishina County school feeding program. And this ensures that various stakeholders are involved. But the point you raise is key, because for it to be sustainable, each of them have to really carry that weight, so that the parent doesn't see it as free,
yes,
or the government doesn't see it as the NGO coming in. But to ensure that sustainability, we've also done research, right? You touched on malnutrition and questions around nutrients. We've done studies to show that this food that I mentioned earlier, that full range, actually caters to a majority of the minimum diversity needs that these children require. So what our program does is also to ensure that for sustainability, because we're also thinking about this child, will they survive? In some areas, there might be food that might not be as healthy. We're trying to bring that in. And one thing as an organization we're looking at is also looking outside of Kenya. We're looking to build partnerships beyond Kenya in Africa to really grow this movement.
Okay.
Where the other stakeholders involved, we urge them to come along. If they're well-wishers, we urge them to go to our website to look at it.
All right. Now, let's move away from the organization.
Yes.
Let us look at now value chains and how they can help in food security in Kenya. Let us look at different people who are in the northern part, the ASAL regions, people who are in these other tropics regions, areas where there's sustainable rain, there's good food systems. But when you look at on this other side of the ASAL regions, we have communities that don't get enough food, they don't get enough rainfall. So when it comes to value chains and how they can contribute into this in order for people in the ASAL regions to also feel included, and people in these other areas also to be on the same, almost a bit on the same level, so that at least maybe when we have drought in the next time, communities cannot really have a difficulty in order for them to sustain themselves. So let us look at value chains and how they help this.
Perfect. Thank you for that. And I think that's important. Obviously, as a country, we are very, very diverse. And when it comes to food security, right, there are various elements. For that seed to get to the farmer, for that farmer to be able to plant it, for that seed to come out, to be harvested, to be transported somewhere, there are various value chains. I can give an example of boda riders, right? They are a key value chain, because if, Kelvin, you left home and your iPad was left at home, they would be the one to bring it to you if you forgot it. Quickly beat traffic so that you can make it on your show.
Okay. When
it comes to food security, for example, these boda riders in Murang'a, I'll use an example with the organization. We provide porridge to children, ECD learners, with the county government subsidizing those meals fully. The boda riders there every day at 9 o'clock, they come to our various kitchens in Murang'a, tens of them across the county, and they have cisterns in the back. They're filled with porridge and they're distributed to various schools, right? These boda boda riders, our research has shown that a majority of the income they make daily, about 60%, just comes from this school feeding, a food security initiative, right? But if we think about value chains, one thing I'd like to point out is obviously COP29 is going on in Baku, and there are conversations. You've talked about some of the more marginalized parts of our country. I think thinking about infrastructure, we need strong road networks, right? As an organization, we also rely strongly on technology, right? We need networks in place to be able to ensure that there's efficiency in how we're securing this food. But another angle to it is also we are seeing a bigger interest in county governments, particularly, who are responsible for ECDs, wanting to put together policies that cater to school feeding, right? Mm-hmm. So we also need to think about what policy framework we need to put in place for these value chains to thrive. Okay. So those are some of the things that we need to consider beyond just food security to ensure that these value chains are in place for it to thrive.
All right, thank you for that. And now, as you mentioned, COP29, of course, which is going on. Now, how can we make sure that the youth are included in climate solutions? Because as you've mentioned, the boda boda riders, of which almost 80% of them, or 85, are young people. So how do we make sure that the youth are included in this, in climate solutions?
I think that is a great point. And I've had the privilege to attend the last two COPs, 28 in Dubai and 27 in Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt. Mm-hmm. And to be honest, the youth were represented, right, globally. But I think we can do more for Kenyan youth to be there. As Food for Education, we're feeding these young children, right, to make sure that they can actually stand up to the climate shocks that will come up. Mm-hmm. But broadly speaking, I believe that packaging and framing the climate crisis in a context that young people can actually relate to, and I think it's possible, draws them to this cause. A few years ago, we saw young people like Greta Thunberg globally, and there are others within this country that have been champions. But I think packaging it in that way would be key. For us, we understand that sustainability is a priority. For example, in the 28 kitchens that we cook in, we ensure to use sustainable methods. We use briquettes, we use gas, we use solar, right? A lot of young people that work in our organization actually appreciate that because we're a sustainable organization. So a big call to other stakeholders involved in conversations about sustainability should think about being sustainable themselves and leading by example. Because we've seen with the young generation now, they actually look to you. Are you doing what you're saying? Are you walking that preach that you profess?
Mm-hmm. Right, and I think we've come to the end. I would just like to get your parting shot even as we close. Just briefly, and then we close the show.
Perfect. Thank you so much for that. I think on our part, we are focused on school feeding, but we really want to put it forward as one solution to address food security. You talked about value chains. I'll end off by talking about, very briefly, a Juakali artisan that we worked with since inception. This Juakali artisan designs the containers that carry the food. They're put on trucks. You might have seen them if you're in Nairobi, Mombasa, Kisumu, that take the food to these schools. Since inception, him and other Juakali artisans have created 12,000 containers to carry that food, right? You would never think about that value chain particularly coming in. School feeding is actually an empowering economic activity. And as we scale, we hope that it'll not only secure food, but also secure livelihoods and secure our economy and our country.
All right, thank you so much for just joining us on this show to discuss about the value chains and also food security and how we can improve that. All right, that's it from us. That is Shalom Diku, who is a sustainability and policy lead at Food for Education, where they feed children in order for them not to just experience malnutrition even going forward and contributing into food security. All right, we've come to the end of this particular edition of Business Today. My name is Kelvin Nyakundi. Stick around. BOKTN is coming up next.